Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming. It's a huge pleasure to have our 5th scientific talks organized by the Veolia Institute and the Department of Scientific and Technological Expertise. We started these meetings in 2023 to provide technical and precise scientific information to a varied public within our company. Some of them are experts from our scientific teams or others who are interested in popularization. And this is very important because the major challenge is the ecological transformation, which applies to all of our activities, water, energy, recycling, is linked to this scientific knowledge. So it's important to share it. So since 2023, we brought in world-renowned experts, Professor Olivier, recently Alexandre Joly, who talked about hydrogen, and Mary Wilson about pandemics and how they spread at a time of climate change, no matter what the American president says. So today we are coming back to environmental health with a fundamental topic, which is the foundation of our essential needs: food, feeding the planet, water, biodiversity, and this is soil health. Of course, this is perfectly in line with the Green Up strategy. So there are many of you here. We have nearly 200 people online as well, because this is really an important topic. I would also like to salute Paul-Antoine Seb, who is in charge of the agricultural services for Veolia Agriculture, and who is a farmer himself. We also have an exceptional guest, our friend Eric Orsena, who is with the French Academy and a world-renowned author, who's also very interested in this topic and who knows our author very well. Because to talk about this strategic topic, we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Marc-André Selosse, international expert of soil health. He's a microbiologist, he's a botanist, mycologist, and so this is a whole list. So he's a professor at the National Museum of Natural History in Paris, at the universities of Gdańsk in Poland and Kunming in China, where he's in charge of research teams. He also teaches in Brazil. He's a lecturer at Sciences Po at the École Normale Supérieure and HSA. And his research looks at symbiosis. And he teaches about plants, microbes, ecology, and evolution. And he's president of the Biologie Federation, which promotes sciences, life sciences. He's a member of the French Agricultural Academy, and he is the editor of 4 international journals, as well as a popular science museum dedicated to natural sciences. Speaking with someone in the room, if we'd had him in our classes earlier, maybe we would have had more vocations. So he shares his knowledge through conferences, documentaries, podcasts, etc. So some of you probably saw him when, in last December, in partnership with the Racine Collective, we showed a very wonderful film, The Songs of the Heart, on agriculture and its stakes. So there is no better expert on these questions. He will be interviewed by Emmanuel Soyeux, who is our local expert on the environment and water. So enjoy the conference. Thank you, Dinah, for this introduction, which gives the framework for the scientific meeting. And thank you to all of you for being here today for our 5th edition, as Dinah said. These meetings are very precious for us because it's a moment for exchanges, with scientists around topics which are emerging today, although perhaps not emerging, but at least subjects which will feed into our research programs for the future, because there's still a lot to be done for soil health, and this is our passion, to anticipate the challenges of our professions for tomorrow and what we can do about it within Veolia. We'll be looking at, so for the Department of Scientific and Technological Expertise, over the several decades already, we've been studying these questions. We have research programs on soil health. It's been 25 years already. Emmanuel Soyeux will say a few words about this later. And, of course, there's still a lot to be done. And as the title of our session says, it's urgent. So how do you actually measure soil health? And what are the consequences of a depleted soil on our own health, for the preservation of biodiversity? What can legislators do? And do we have any concrete solutions to restore soil health? These are questions which today we will be answering, thanks to the intervention by Marc-André Selosse, and I thank him for being here today. So these research programs started over 25 years ago, especially with Anne Gueraud. This is a program we carry out with INRAE, which is a National Institute for Research in the Environment and Agriculture and Food, with a research center near Paris. And we also have other projects for irrigation or Nutri-Loop programs. So Emmanuel Soyeux will be our moderator today for our scientific exchanges with Professor Selosse. So Emmanuel is an expert within the Department of Scientific and Technological Expertise for over 20 years now. So he is an expert in environmental risks, and he is a graduate of AgroParisTech, and he holds a diploma in agriculture and water, and he will be moderating this Veolia talk, and he will explain why it's urgent to act for soil health. And I now give the floor to our two guests. Thank you, Dinah, and thank you, Anne, for your introductions. And thank you, Marc-André Selosse, for doing us the honor of being here. So very quickly, let's move on to a few questions. To better understand the topic of soil health, first of all, to get started, maybe you could explain what soil health actually is and what criteria are applied to assess soil health. Soil health is a way of understanding that the soil is us, because if you have wonderful soil, but you add oil, heavy metals, it's going to die. And the microorganisms will die, if you say. Except for some of them, obviously, who will just love it. But a healthy soil is soil where the function works with our own health, because soil feeds us. This is what grows plants that we eat, and that what the animals that we eat eat. And soil is what gathers water from the water tables, so all of this water comes from the soil, comes from underground, which is then purified by soil. And soil also has an impact on quality of air, because everything dust or everything that comes out of the soil when it rains, there are a lot of molecules which are released when it rains. That's that specific smell. So healthy soil means healthy humans. If you were a fungus, you might like oil much better. You would have a completely different image of what healthy soil is. But for us, a healthy soil is a soil that produces food that's healthy for humans. So another question I wanted to ask you. How do you provide a diagnostic of soil health. A variety of geographies in France, and then more broadly in Europe and around the world. We have data because through agriculture, through forestry, we manage soil, but the figures aren't very good. 60 to 70% of European soils are said to be in bad health. And if you look at the causes of this, or what deteriorates the soil and prevents it from providing us with healthy food, first and foremost, there's the problem of erosion. It's a natural process whereby soil disappears as it is recreated, but if it erodes quickly, then more quickly than it is created, then you have a problem. So the trouble with tilling soil is that it's open to the elements, and it erodes 10 times faster than it would if it had plant coverage. So it's not sustainable to till the soil everywhere, and especially not to till it too much, because this leads to erosion. And there are other problems as well. There's microplastics coming from the atmosphere. This is difficult to avoid. But there's also residue from pesticides. 80% of pesticides in the soil are deteriorated by the microorganisms in the soil. But this means that 10% is left over for food, and all the rest goes into the water. So one of the problems managing soil, well, especially in drier areas, because when you irrigate, you have minerals in the water, and then these minerals become concentrated in the soil. And if you don't have the rain to wash this away, then the soil becomes saltier. And this leads to... And every year, 2% of irrigated soil disappears because of this, because it becomes too salty. And then there's also sealing of soil in the fertile plains. When the infrastructure grow in the plains, it always takes up the most fertile soil, 3.7 times faster than demographic growth. Because then people want to have individual houses, live in green areas, and all of this uses up a lot of land. And every year we lose the amount that would be needed to feed a city such as Le Havre. But we still have soil, and we still have arable land, and we still have time to take action. So this is a message of hope. Soils are vital, and some have not been deteriorated or depleted to the extent that we cannot correct the trajectory. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this here. So we've sort of already answered the question I had, which is the consequences of soil depletion and the last aspect. So we talked about fertility, the impact on the water cycle, and the third aspect has to do with climate change. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about this as well. Yes, if I could just come back to the water cycle. We have predictions for Europe saying that by 2050, this is mostly for France, less 10% rain in summer, but more rain throughout the year. So we need healthy soils because this makes it micro holes that water can enter. But not tilling, because this makes too big holes, which just make the soil collapse. So you need these micro aeration. And when it rains a lot, this makes it possible for the soil to absorb this water and to preserve it for summer. Healthy soils are full of life because there's between 50 and 400 liters per square meter of water it can absorb. And this has an effect to mitigate the effects of climate change. And then the living organisms in the soil deteriorate slowly, and depending on the molecules, it can take between 10 and 1 million years. And this makes the soil the largest stock of carbon in the world. Its organic matter contains 2 times more carbon than the atmosphere and 3 times more than the entire mass of living organisms on Earth. So healthy soils can be carbon sinks unless they're sealed. And all of this is one of the levers to feed us. And there are methodologies, for example, to plant forests for climate. And if you don't manage your soils well, if you irrigate too much, if you have too many fertilizers that you add, this leads to methane emissions, and other greenhouse gases, which are 30 times more potent than CO2. This doesn't mean that you have to stop fertilizing, you have to stop irrigating, but there are other ways to go about it. Managing soil represents half of the impact of agriculture on climate change. But we really have to change the way we do things to improve matters. So coming back to the title of our talk today, and the fact that it's urgent to take action. We mentioned this earlier. So given the problems we're facing, there are a number of solutions. Perhaps we could list them and look at a few of them in more detail. So how do we prevent depletion of the soil? Well, science is there to keep watch, to look at what the coming challenges are. But science also can see what may be possible, to see what solutions may be possible in the future, given our current state of knowledge. As knowledge stands today, we realize that we shouldn't till the soil. Soil should remain covered with vegetation. People think that soil is resting in the winter when fields are just left open, but no, it's dying. The ground is always fed by the roots of the plants, which keeps it in place, prevents it from eroding. So the ground should never be left bare. It should always be covered by vegetation. And then in the soil, there's nothing that cuts. There are roots that grow, that split, but nothing is ever cut. So you shouldn't cut anything. Even if you're tilling or you're preparing it for planting, limit cutting as much as you can. Okay, obviously, if you are going to dig up potatoes, you will have to do some digging. But as far as possible, you shouldn't turn the soil over. And then you should leave as much vegetable matter as you can in place. And so we've lost nearly half of those services since the 1950s. And organic matter keeps water, prevents the soil from eroding, and this also has an impact on the climate because it's a carbon sink. And all of this life underground is what keeps the soil healthy. So providing organic matter as fertilizer, and also because this is what you need for the soil to be healthy. And unfortunately, a lot of organic matter that we use is just thrown away, whereas it should be returned to the fields. And there's also a regulatory aspect to this. So what could we do in this area to better protect soil? Well, I'm not an expert in regulations, but I know that Europe has played an essential role. Trends change, politicians change. I don't know if the European Parliament has as much strength today as before to ensure that our common heritage is protected. But there was a goal to ensure that by 2030, 75% of soil in Europe would be healthy. It's going to be hard to do that by 2030. And then there were a number of decisions that were taken recently with a new directive, the soil monitoring law, which was enacted recently. Okay, it's not extremely ambitious, but it's already a step in the right direction. Now we have to see how it will be transposed into national law and whether the regulation will be truly followed. Because we do know that a lot of farmers are struggling and they don't have the money to invest. And we also know that not all citizens, because of their training or awareness, not everybody realizes how important self is. This is where our water comes from. This is where all of our minerals come from. So I don't know if people really realize how important it is. But today, let's put it bluntly, with inaction at national level, Europe is actually the one doing the most to protect the soil. But unfortunately, citizens don't really seem to care. And therefore, they won't be grateful either. It's kind of sad to put it that way, but this is a time when I really truly feel European. In this context, I really do feel European. So regulations, yes, but also awareness of the general public. Okay. Well, maybe now you could say what Veolia is doing in this area, because this is part of your scope. In any case, your actions have an important impact. Yes, we don't think about this very often, but there are two things that I wanted to recall here about soil and Veolia. We have two concrete actions that we take. First of all, in our professions. Earlier we were saying Veolia agriculture with restoring soil health. This is their profession. Another activity we haven't mentioned is in cleaning up polluted soil. And this is part of Veolia Toxic Waste Europe. And the second way we take action is through research. We mentioned this earlier. Very often in collaboration with world-renowned academics. So there's the question of restoring soil health. So Veolia Agriculture is the primary French producer. I'm looking for the right word in my notes here. So the primary producer of organic fertilizer. So for 2 million hectares benefit from this organic fertilizers, and their impact goes well beyond the immediate impacts on the soil. And so this fertilizer comes from compost, mainly. And then there's soil remediation. And here there's heavier actions with excavations and extracting this heavy metals, for example, from the soils and treating the soil to restore its health, to make them arable once again. And then research and our actions. We mentioned Anne. This is a program we've carried out with INRAE for nearly 30 years now, since 1998. So this is 6 hectares of land where we carry out comparisons to see the impacts of compost of urban origins compared with compost and manure. So these are very long-term trials to show the importance of the different types of compost and their impact on the soil. So those are the two elements we look at. And it's the same thing for fertile irrigation, where you see how useful this process is, what the impact is on the soil. Does it make the soil saltier? And then if you reuse wastewater, what impact does that have? So all of this is checked and studied. of sea line levels, acidification, whether yields are maintained. We're having experiments with a vineyard as well. In 2013, our trials were carried out over 1.5 hectares near Narbonne, and now there are about 20 hectares, and soon we will be multiplying the services by 10. This is the ambition of local actors. We may have a similar program, a more recent one, for major farms, so it was no longer drip irrigation, but a program for corn, and this experiment took place near Tarbes. So those are the two research actions that I wanted to mention in parallel to the daily exercise of our professions.
Alors, pour continuer sur les questions que l'on pouvait se poser, donc on a discuté des éléments scientifiques de constat, mais on a très probablement encore des zones d'ombre sur ce que vous disiez tout à l'heure sur la progression de la science, donc l'état actuel des connaissances qui conduit à ne pas proposer exactement la même chose que ce qu'on proposait hier et ce que l'on m'a enseigné, entre autres. Donc, quelles sont les incertitudes scientifiques qui demeurent?
Oui, alors ça, on calculait en montant sur l'estrade qu'on avait fait nos études à peu près de façon synchrone. Et c'est vrai que le sol qu'on avait eu, nous, dans nos études, ne ressemble plus au sol actuel en termes conceptuels. Et
you know that today we are not just talking about concepts, but we're talking about actual land use that we're experimenting with. We have different types of fungus and amoeba that live in the soil. The soil is really the repository of a huge amount of biodiversity. 2/3 of the living species on Earth live in the soil. It's enormous. But if I speak about this, I can also say that we haven't finished exploring this. We don't know anything about the viruses that live in soil, for example. We're constantly finding new families of viruses. And we don't know what happens to... I know what we do with what is the role of the microorganisms and the fungus, but the virus, we don't really know what their action is on the soil. So when we're talking about soil health, we're talking about what you might call black matter, because there's so much that is really invisible to us. So it's important that we keep going with our research and that we optimize what you're talking about, soil restoration, for example. Of course, you can plant things that restore the health of the soil. You can also burn vegetable matter and then reintroduce it into the soil. There are certain microbes or fungus that we can introduce into the soil that destroy certain hydrocarbons or polyorganic materials. But it's very expensive. It's 100,000 euros per square meter. So we need to find solutions that are feasible. It's not necessarily a technical solution that will always be the best one. There's a film coming out called The Devastated City, and it talks about how we just tried to find chemical solutions. I think we need to talk about living solutions. What is the concept of living things? If you have metal concentration in the soil, for example, all of the parts of the landmass that you're treating will not be infiltrated with the same amount of metals. So maybe you need to look at it on a smaller level so that you can remove metals where necessary. I don't know if this will really reduce the cost, but it will make it faster, I think, if you can decide exactly where you have to remove metals and where you can let the living organisms do their work. So I would say that for the future, we have to think about providing food and supporting agriculture. We need to have information on the soil, and we don't have a simple test. Historically, the farmer took his hoe out to the field, and he could have a look at the soil after planting his hoe in it. But we don't really have a consensus on what is the best way today to evaluate the state or the health of the soil. There's a paradox today. Think about your urine, how much everyone produces every day. It goes into the sewage system, it goes through a water treatment plant, it's mixed up with heavy metals, it's mixed up with hydrocarbons. And then if this sludge is spread over the soil, you can see it's what happened near Paris at the shale plains. This sandy plain became polluted with metals that were the result of the use of this sludge from the water treatment plants. So it's important to sort out our wastewaters, because some wastewater can be less toxic. For example, if you set aside the medical waste that might be present in our urine, but usually your urine can be used, and we need to really separate the water treatment into two streams. You could have urine on one side and fecal matter on the other. There's a lot at stake here, because if we could reuse urine, 150 kilos produced per year by person, that would be about 20 to 40% of the required fertilizer needs of the French agriculture per year. So rather than having our farmers spend a huge amount of money on fertilizers, they could spend half as much using urine. And it would also reduce transportation costs for fertilizers. I know that water treatment is part of your job, and I think we need to carry out more research and more applied research in order to separating out different types of wastewater. So perhaps that's a good place to stop so that we can leave some time for questions. We have another half an hour left, I think. You want me to ask the final question before we give the floor to the attendees here? Well, so the question is, can you tell us, in conclusion, what key message you would like to share? What are your perspectives for the future? How do you see the future of soil health? And what role do we play? How can we reach these objectives? We talked about raising awareness in the population and civil society. What can we do to achieve these goals? Well, as we were saying earlier, the best solutions will not work if people don't put them into application. So you can see how people react to certain solutions when people were opposed to nuclear energy, for example, but we still have it. Then we talked about GMOs, and we said, oh, don't worry about it. But people stood up and they said, no, they didn't agree with it. So you can see that when you throw a solution at society without really explaining things to them, people will not accept them. So we have to find systemic solutions that are accepted by people. So, you can't point the finger at farmers and saying, no, they're not doing their job well. But the fact that we buy their products means that somehow we accept the way that they farm the land. Other people say, oh, it's the politicians' fault. So really, we're talking about systems. And within a system, everyone is both the problem and the solution. There are what the consumer does, there's what the journalist does, what the politician does. These can be part of the problem, but also part of the solution. When we're looking at cycles, Journalists inform the citizens, and then citizens choose which journalists they prefer to read. There's a kind of one feeds upon the other. So it's very important that information seeps into all layers of society, and that the measures or the extra costs that are required for managing waste and resources are acceptable to the population in the short term and the long term. So the most important thing to me is information and training. So that's a good reason for me to be here today and to thank you for this opportunity to talk about soil health. We have a structure that brings together many different institutions, the Academy of Science, of Medicine, and so forth. And the purpose of this grouping of institutions is to organize or participate in festivals and trade fairs and educational initiatives. Luc is one of the sponsors of this. You've done quite a bit for us. And we are trying to develop the teaching of life sciences and environmental sciences. And what's important is that the teaching of the economic sciences also coincides with the teaching of biology and environmental sciences. We will have tools that people can use. You at Veolia develop tools, but people have to be encouraged and taught how to use them or why they're useful. So the solution to me is teaching and training. Now, in secondary education, people have only 2 hours of training about soil health in their life sciences program. Only 2 hours in their whole life. And, after the secondary school, most students don't have any life sciences at all. So, of course, these questions of food and how we produce it are very important. And so what we need to do is train the new generation, because the previous generation that has just come through the education system does not have any information about soil health. We need to restudy this problem. Of course, that's not the only solution, but it won't be a panacea, but it will help us prepare for the future. We have many tools at our disposal, but people are quite indifferent and quite ignorant about soil health. So we have questions from the room now. Thank you, Professor. This was very interesting. I am the president of Agriculture, and it's true that some of the solutions you've talked about are very expensive. The question of raising awareness is indeed very important, and at Veolia we feel very important. We feel very involved in raising awareness. And we have an initiative called +1 Agriculture, which involves training different stakeholders to see how Veolia can be involved in the agriculture of tomorrow. So my question is, would you agree to sponsor our +1 initiative? Well, it would be hard to refuse. You've kind of got me pinned down here. My work today is to spread information, to share information, and to do this last kilometer, so to speak, for scientific knowledge, to go between the research teams and the public. So you're not talking about greenwashing here. I think we're talking about concrete, positive activity carried out by scientists. And I think this is something that you will be doing in your initiative. And so, yes, I would agree to participate. So this is an important tool. And I would like to announce to everyone that for the first time in 15 years, Veolia will be present at the agricultural fair And we will be showing everyone what we can do, what we know how to do, and this is for today and for the future. You know that yields are topping out. We're looking at production of more and more biomass that is required for energy needs and also for feeding, for feedstock. At the same time, we see that the soils are more and more degraded in France, and so we're losing €1 billion per year because of soil depletion. And I'd like to thank you very much for accepting our proposal to join our initiative, 1+. I'll look forward to meeting with you on that. Dear Professor, we owe you a lot. Me, first of all, as an economist. I have 4 comments. First of all, with regard to the general ignorance of the population, there's a kind of a rule that the closer it is to us, the less we care about it. So I think that it's a bit like a marriage, excuse the comparison. You know, sometimes the most important problems are what we say in French, they're as beautiful as the neighbor's wife. But we don't look at our own wives. We don't know how to deal with things that are close to us in our own backyards. As an economist in raw materials, I must say I knew nothing about soil. I know about water, but I didn't know anything about soil. But I have started to learn about soil thanks to you. That's the first point. Second point. As you said, if there's no narrative, it's true, people don't care. You can see what happens in France. There's no narrative, people don't follow. So the question of narrative is key. This is why, with Dinah, I started my work with water by focusing on the matter that is water. A river or a stream is a character, and we don't care about matter, we care about character. So this is why narrative is important. The third point is that it's very important, of course, to inform, to meet the public, and we're launching a program called Adopt a River. That is, once every quarter, we will bring young pupils to see the river. This is an initiative we're carrying out throughout France, and then as they grow up, they will really become attached to this river. And the fourth point is the general mobilization with all the power behind researchers and the research that you produce. The Caliagro program is fantastic, but it's important to talk to people about it, to inform people. I think the message is it's not too late, but it is urgent. So it's important that we involve young people, and I'd like to talk about, in fact, young people and how they can find our planet marvelous. We love our planet. That's why we want to fight for it. But we've seen that the fact that we even exist on this planet, that this planet exists with all its diversity, is simply marvelous, and the young people are aware of that, and we need to encourage that. So I think that when I think how crazy it is to say that curiosity killed the cat, no, that's a terrible thing to say. No, what kills us is indifference, not curiosity. And I think that curiosity is also what will help us discover more about biodiversity and life itself. Yes, it's true. You're saying we don't have enough narrative. We don't have enough stories. I think it's true that often scientists and technicians don't know how to tell a story. And that's why we need a diversity of knowledge and a diversity of expertise so that people can help us. And I know that for water, for example, we've had a lot of people telling these stories. This is what I refer to as the last kilometer between the researchers and the public. You know, I was talking with Philippe about something. I was really struck by the fact that here at Veolia, we can work with Pasteur. I'm an ambassador for Pasteur, and it's very hard for us to really have strong ties with Pasteur. So I started to complain about. We'll see where that goes. And if it doesn't work out, I think I'll keep raising my voice. We need to develop our work with the Pasteur Institute. Hello, Mr. Selosse. Thank you very much for speaking to us today. I have two questions. The first concerns tilling. You talk a lot about the damages caused by tilling the soil, but for 12,000 years we've been tilling the soil. And in vineyards, the soil is turned over every year, and it hasn't produced problems up to now. And we can see that there are places where soil is in good health despite this tilling. So why have the past 50 years been so detrimental to soil and have led to its degradation? And my second question is a bit more subliminal, perhaps. You talked about phosphates being less dangerous to the soil than tilling. Do you still maintain that position? And if so, can you give us some scientific references for that position? With regard to tilling, you know, 1 glass of wine is good for the health. 2 glasses of wine is not good. So you start something, it can be good, but if you continue doing it, the recurrent aspect can have bad effects. So when you start tilling, it can be good because you're bringing up minerals and nutrients that may have sunk down to lower levels to the rain, so it can be good. So on the short term, tilling can be good. But after a while, it begins to rip up roots, it rips up fungus, and it kills the life of the soil. It destructures the soil. It reduces the living material by 10 to 20%. It creates greenhouse gases. We've seen in recent years that tilling is actually adding to greenhouse gases. 300 gigatons of carbon are emitted by tilling the soil every year. So we've started to see these negative effects. It's true that in the beginning, when you were tilling the soil, you could see that porosity, water retention were increasing. But people had to use glyphosate to reduce weeds, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think a big mistake was made. Excuse me if I'm being a bit dramatic about it, but in the U.S. or in the Americas, they had prodigious agricultural civilizations without using iron blades, without tilling the soil, without plows. And when tilling began, we could see, first of all, you know, there were large cities began to be established in areas that previously had been reserved for agriculture. This also has an impact on the soil. When you're tilling, you also tap down the deepest layers of the soil. And you know, when it rains in France, there's only 10 or 30 centimeters of the soil that are actually absorbing the soil, and the soil can be washed away. This leads to flooding and erosion. This is the result of tilling. So water can no longer penetrate into the soil. We don't have the water tables that are refilling. Roots are no longer able to reach down into the lower levels of the soil to find water. So this is why I say tilling is not good. It's gotten worse since the 50s because tilling is more extensive, because we now have mechanical machinery that can work the farmland. Now, when I come back to the glyphosate, I think it's time for us to move because, in the U.S., we're talking about 40% of agricultural land that is not in use. In Europe, it's only 20%. So, in fact, people need to remove weeds without tilling. How can you do it? There is one technique that I discussed recently in a seminar, but it's not great. It's a system where you remove the weeds from the top centimeters. Then there's glyphosate, which is toxic for the farmers themselves. We know that it is related to cancer. It's bad for the earthworms. It kills some fungus in the soil, so it's not great. But it's not as bad as tilling. Soil comes back to life if you stop tilling, even if you use glyphosate. It prevents... There are other methods for removing weeds, maybe chemicals that are not as toxic as glyphosate. I don't know about them, but if soil is not tilled, even if you use glyphosate, it will increase the number of living species that are alive in the soil, and it will increase the biomass. I don't have the references on hand right now, but I think that eventually perhaps we could do without glyphosate, but I think that people who have decided to stop tilling and prefer glyphosate, we shouldn't point a finger at them. I won't be here defending glyphosate, but I would like to tell you that a lot of weeds are now resistant to glyphosate. So in any event, glyphosate will no longer be very effective, and I think we'll stop using it soon for that reason. We need to find an alternative for people who have no-till farms but need to remove weeds and pests. So what you're saying, what Philippe says, what I hear everywhere, and what you have just said is that we are moving towards a general resistance to antibiotics, for example, and people who don't understand the developing resistance of plant materials are making a mistake. Yes, it's part of the natural history. There is no ultimate balance. Evolution means that the world is constantly changing. It's the cultural world, the biological world is dynamic and constant change. And so whether you're talking about pesticides or techniques, you have to constantly change. We don't want to have a Pyrrhic victory, do we? You shouldn't use molecules as a last resort. You shouldn't be using several molecules at once, because that means that things will become resistant to 3, 4, 5 molecules at once. And then you have to increase your dosage. So the first thing is it's important to have strategies that take account of change, to not think about the short-term battle that you're waging. You have to think about hedgerows. You have to think about long cycle crop rotation. You have to think about the differences in landscapes, how we can mix up different seed stock. using modern and historical seeds. There are different crop rotations. You know, if you mix up varieties, you can reduce by 10 to 50% the presence of plant diseases in your crops. So it's important to mix up the crops as well to improve plants' resistance. You know, there are many different solutions. We must avoid the temptation of a Pyrrhic victory that would involve using just one solution at a time, but we have to really have a group of solutions that cover a range of approaches. I think in this dynamic and changing environment, we have to have many different solutions.
I wish I had time for one last question, but I know you have another appointment. No? Okay, one last question. Great. So on territories such as in Normandy, compost is now in competition with agricultural waste. So what else can we do besides compost to improve soil health? Well, we had a session last year, and it's online on organic matter, because there's a whole debate around this. So organic waste from our garbage cans or from cattle raising or from intermediate crops in the winter, which are there to produce biomass. But, well, the first question is methanization. That's a great idea, except that the carbon that is stored goes back into the atmosphere. It's only stored for a year. Okay, but it does produce energy, which is reasonably clean. And you can always use this waste as fertilizers. It's like mineral fertilizers. It has the same pros and cons. It's not perfect, but at least you're recycling. And there's also putting this organic mass back into the soil. This organic matter fights against erosion, stores carbon for much longer periods. It's actually circular. It retains more water, so anti-erosion, as I said, and it's good for the climate. And then, of course, it feeds microorganisms in the soil. So those two uses, and then the government has said that the priority is to maintain the soils. Yes, of course, we depend on them. We have to maintain them or our family will die. But in reality, the energy urgency says that development plans for methanization plants will take up all of the organic matter we have by 2030. So that would be ridiculous. We're not against methanization. And we're not pro or con as far as putting it back in the soil, but you have to find the right mix for each area. And we mustn't let our thirst for power deprive us of food. One last point. So we talked about the importance of the narrative to raise awareness, and this is very important. So as a farmer, something that worries me, this is the renewal of generations, because farming is a hard job, and your revenue isn't necessarily guaranteed. And I think that scientists can play another role in addition to raising awareness. This is how can we deliver new, easy and simple solutions for growing food. I'm full of admiration of organic farmers. You have to be very skilled for organic farming. I'm a basic farmer and I'm not very smart. I just do what INRA has been telling me to do for years. Restoring soil health, improving yield, organic matter, this requires new ways of growing food. So my request to science is to try to popularize this in a simple way. Otherwise, future generations are going to say, okay, no, farmers don't earn any money. It's more and more complicated. No thanks. So finding farmers for tomorrow is a true challenge. Let me just say that I'm also terrified at seeing that young people do not want to become farmers. And this is something that's always in the back of my mind. It is vital to have young farmers, especially since people can really fulfill themselves on farms. I grew up on a farm, and it provides life with a depth and wealth that I don't see elsewhere. And so to explain what you're saying, there's a concentrate by Paul Valéry. Everything that's simple is wrong, and everything that isn't can't be used. And that's where we are, constantly between the two. So, and farming, of course, is at the heart of the matter. Mentally speaking, and economically speaking. So, organic farming, yes, it's possible, and this is the thing we do. INRAE has 6,000 farms where they come and they help the farmers manage the farm. They test things out. They look into the financial aspects. And then secondly, if people took it to heart, and this may seem like an oxymoron, but farming isn't there to feed humanity. And so why is this? Because it's multifunctional. It occupies 50% of land in our country, and one of its functions is actually to zone the land and also to manage where water falls and to preserve the water and to purify the water. So one of the functions of farming is to produce water. And then the water comes back out, either purified by the soil or polluted by what's in the soil. And so that contributes to the quality of air. And it also feeds us. Farming is multifunctional, and you can't have your cake and eat it too. So you have to understand that farming revenues can only be based on producing food. So maybe this is one of the aspects that could actually fill us with wonder once again and make young people want to become farmers, because farming is the future of humanity. It can also be the future of some young people for their professions, and we have to help people realize this. And I think Veolia could be extremely useful in propagating those ideas. And you have more money than I do. Thank you very much. And please don't hesitate to fill out the satisfaction questionnaire if you have any remarks. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Emmanuel. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.